Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. And this is one of the best lectures in the course, certainly the one that I enjoy teaching the most. So we're going to teach you how to use launch configurations and auto-scaling groups. So you're going to need to log into the AWS console. But the first thing I want you to do is just go into your favorite text editor. Okay, so all we're going to do here is create our health check text. So I'm just going to write, I am healthy, and then I'm going to save this. And then I'm just going to call it healthcheck.html. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is go over to the AWS console. Okay, so I'm in the AWS console and I'm just going to go over to S3 and I'm going to access that bucket that we created for the Bootstrap script. So it's a Cloud Guru website bucket. And currently I've got my index.html in there, and I'm just going to quickly upload that health check file that we just created. So there we go, healthcheck.html, and hit start upload. And so now we've got an index page and a health check. So what I'm going to do now is go back across to EC2. And if you remember, we created an elastic load balancer. And if you've deleted that load balancer, you'll need to recreate it. But essentially, at the moment, it's got no instances behind it. It's available across all three availability zones. It runs a health check to healthcheck.html. And our healthy threshold is 2. And our unhealthy threshold is 2. And our healthy threshold is 3, and our interval is 10 seconds. So within 20 seconds, it would detect whether or not our site had or our EC2 instance had gone offline, and within 30 seconds, it would detect whether or not it was healthy. So I'm going to leave all the settings for this elastic load balancer as they are, and what I'm going to do now is go over to launch configurations under the auto scaling section, and we're going to go in and create an auto scaling group. So let's start with the basics. Before you can create an auto-scaling group, you have to create a launch configuration, and it's essentially just going through what you would normally do when you create an EC2 instance. So we'll click launch configurations, and then we're going to select our AMI. So you can use the Amazon Linux AMI here, or you could even go into My AMIs, and if you've got your own custom AMIs that you've provisioned from snapshots, you would be able to select them in here. We don't yet have that, but we will be using that on later on in the course. So I'm going to go ahead here and just use the normal standard Amazon Linux AMI. I'm going to go ahead and use T2 Micro. So what are we going to call this launch configuration group? We're just going to call it my auto scaling group. And I'm not going to use spot instances. I am going to use my S3 admin role. And in here I can put in my Bootstrap script. So I can do kernel ID and RAM disk ID. Again, you don't need to really know what that is for the purposes of the exam, but you can put in your Bootstrap scripts here. So I'm going to use the same Bootstrap script that we used in the lab for Bootstrap scripts. So I've just got it in my clipboard. So if you remember, it was the shebang followed by the path to our interpreter to initialize the Bootstrap script, and then everything else that's run under here is done using root level access when this EC2 instance first fires up. So we're installing Apache, we're updating the OS, we're then copying the contents of our bucket, and then we are starting the Apache service, and we're making sure that the Apache service stays on in case the EC2 instance reboots. So what we need to do here is just enter in our bucket. Remember, if you've forgotten the name of your bucket, you can just click that arrow and open it in a new tab, go over to S3, and then you can get the name of your bucket. So mine is a Cloud Guru website bucket. So I'm going back over here. So S3, a Cloud Guru website bucket. And what I'm actually going to do, instead of just copying each individual object, I'm going to copy the entire contents of the bucket. So I'm just going to remove that, and then to var www.html, and then we just need to use this switch, which is recursive. And again, I'll put this this slightly updated script in the resources section of this lecture, but that should be it. That will essentially copy the entire contents of our bucket to our web directory, and then it will start the Apache service and make sure the Apache service remains on in case this instance reboots. Here we've got our IP address type, so only assign a public IP address to instances launched in the default VPC and subnet. Assign a public IP address to every instance. Do not assign a public IP address to any instances. What I'm going to do is just leave it as the default for now, because what we are going to want to do is access each instance individually, as well as being able to access it via the load balancer. So just leave it as the default value for now. Go ahead and add our storage, that's fine. Our security group, we will just use the existing web DMZ security group. Go ahead and hit review. And that's basically it. You're going to get this little warning message about SSH being open to the world. You can review everything that you've done, and then you can create your launch configuration group. And again, select the EC2 key pair. So essentially, it's just like creating an EC2 instance, except when you hit create launch configuration group, you're not actually provisioning any EC2 instance. Now, straight away, we've created our launch configuration group, and now we're on our create autoscaling group page. It takes us straight there. So we'll call this group. So the launch configuration name is up here, so we can see my autoscaling group. So I'm going to call the group name my autoscaling group as well. And the group size, I'm actually going to start with 3 instances. It's up to you how many you want to start with. Just remember, we're going to have to stay within free tier, but certainly at least start with 2, just so you can get this lab to work. The network, we're just going to use the default VPC. Okay, so in our subnets, we click in here and you can see our different availability zones. So if you click just one availability zone, it will create this auto-scaling group within that particular availability zone. So the whole reason around auto-scaling is to have a redundant platform, a redundant website. So if you lose one individual availability zone, it shouldn't have an impact on your website whatsoever. You shouldn't have any downtime. So obviously you probably want to choose all availability zones. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to choose all within this region. Now you see we've got 3. What autoscaling will automatically do is it will put one instance in here, one instance in here, one instance in here. So it will put them across the 3 availability zones. It's not going to be silly and just put 3 instances in one availability zone, unless of course you only give it that option by removing the availability zones. So I'm going to spread it across 3. Likewise, if you had 4, it would then put another instance in an availability zone, but it spreads it evenly across the different availability zones. Here we've got our advanced details. Now this is important. So we've got our elastic load balancer that we created in one other lab, in the elastic load balancing lab. So what we're going to do here is click receive traffic from the elastic load balancer, and we're going to select our elastic load balancer. So it's called my web DMZ. And then we need to select our health check type. So do we want to run our health checks off EC2, or do we want to run it off our elastic load balancer? And I'm going to select my elastic load balancer. Okay, so we then have our health check grace period. And this is basically the length of time that autoscaling waits before checking an instance's health status. So the grace period begins when an instance first comes into service. And if no value is, default value is 300 seconds, so it's 5 minutes, 0 for no grace period. So if you remember, we've got our bootstrap scripts that are running, and it's going to go in and actually, first it's going to go in and install Apache, then it's going to apply all our updates, then it's going to move the contents of our S3 bucket across, and then it's going to turn Apache on. Now, basically, our health check is going to fail until Apache is turned on. So we wouldn't really want that as 0 seconds. And really the length of time is just depends. You can go out and try your bootstrap script and see how quickly it takes for that EC2 instance to come up. I'm going to change this and just be a little bit conservative, and I'm going to make it 2.5 minutes, so 150 seconds. So that should give me plenty of time for my EC2 instance to come on, install Apache, apply all the updates, and then move the contents of that bucket across. Okay, so we just leave the other values as our default and go ahead and hit next to configure our scaling policies. Okay, so we then have configure our scaling policies, and essentially this allows us to automatically increase our the number of instances in our auto-scaling group, or decrease the number of instances in our auto-scaling group depending on what settings we do. So we can click here and we can say scale between, let's say, 1 and let's say 5 instances. and we can go in here and say take the action. First of all, we need to add an alarm. So it says execute policy when, and there's no alarm selected at this stage. So I can go in and create an alarm. So basically within here, I can say whenever the average of CPU utilization is greater than or equal to, let's say 90% for one consecutive period of 5 minutes. And I don't want to get an SNS notification, so I'm going to uncheck that and I go ahead and hit create. So essentially what this is doing now is it's going to, as soon as this alarm is triggered, we then take this action. So if my CPU utilization is greater than 90% for more than 5 minutes, I want to add one instance when CPU utilization is greater than 90% for infinity. So I'm going to add one instance, and then instances need however long to warm up after each step. So I'm going to wait another 5 minutes before doing this again. And we can do a similar one here. We can decrease the group size. Let's say if my CPU utilization is less than 90%, I can start killing the instances within that auto-scaling group. So then that way my auto-scaling group will grow and shrink depending on how much, depending on the load of the CPU. So you can actually do really clever things in here. Now, for the purposes of this lab, we're not going to decrease and increase the group size. We will do that later on in the assignment that's coming up. So I'm just going to go back here and click on keep this group at its initial size. So we can configure our notifications here. So we could say send a notification to the sysadmin team with these recipients. So you can just enter in an email address. So I'll just do the acloudguru@gmail.com address. And basically it's going to send us an email whenever instances launch, terminate, fail to launch, or fail to terminate. So go ahead and hit next. We can then configure our tags. So we could say, staff ID, these instances relate to this particular staff member. We could also say that the department, these instances belong to department. And then we could say, this is the test and dev team. And we'll go ahead and hit review. And there we go. So this is our auto scaling group. It's all ready to go, and we go ahead and hit create auto scaling group. And so now it will go through, it's going to go in and launch our EC2 instances. So if we actually come back over to the EC2 dashboard, you will see if we go into our running instances, we can see that our 3 instances are now being launched. And if you actually go in and check, you can see it's spread across the 3 availability zones automatically. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video and wait for these instances to come up online. If our Bootstrap script has worked, we won't need to SSH into these instances at all. It will automatically pull down the contents of our web page. So I'm just going to pause the video now. We'll see what happens. Okay, so that didn't take very long. We can see here our 3 different instances, and we've got our 3 different public IP addresses. So if I go to 1A, you can see it's 52.16.2.58, which you can see here. If I click on this tab, you can see hello Cloud Gurus, I'm now alive. And if I check in on each URL or each IP address, we can see the same index page that's being shown. So it has worked. The other thing we can also do is just go to our Elastic Load Balancer and grab this DNS name. And if we open up a new tab and just enter this DNS name, you can now see it's going to one of the 3 instances, hello Cloud Gurus, I'm now alive. So let's do something fun. Let's go back in and just start killing instances just for the fun of it and see what happens. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to kill 1A and just go ahead and go terminate. And then I'm also going to go ahead and terminate in 1C. So only 1B has stayed alive. So essentially what I'm doing here is So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm simulating availability zone failure across 2 availability zones, and I want to see how auto-scaling reacts. So I've just gone in, and the only IP address that's still valid is this .234. So if I go here and hit refresh, you can see it's going to start timing out. Same with .160, if I hit refresh, it's going to start timing out, whereas 234, if I hit refresh, still alive. Now if I go in here and use my my Elastic Load Balancer and hit refresh, it's going to still deliver traffic to my instances that are alive. And the way it's figuring that out is through the health checks. It knows that this EC2 instance is currently alive, whereas these two instances are currently in trouble. And if we go down to our elastic load balancer, we can actually view how this is all working. So go in and see our instances. So straight away it's detected that only one instance is in service. The other two instances are now out of service, and it's not sending traffic to those instances. So let's go back to our EC2 dashboard and have a look at what's going on. So it's going to take our auto-scaling group just a little bit of time to figure this out, figure out that there has been a problem. But if we just go ahead and hit refresh, we can see, okay, it has now realized that one of my instances has gone down, and it is replacing that instance using the pending one, and that instance has now come up and is running. So it's automatically starting to re-provision my instances in different availability zones, and I now have a new public IP address .116, which I don't have up here. The important thing is, though, however, my elastic load balancer is still serving traffic to the instances that are still healthy. So it is very clever technology. You can basically have instances spread across multiple availability zones, and even if you lose 2 of those availability zones out of 3, you still won't have an outage. On top of this, we can start doing really cool things with Route 53, whereby we start protecting ourselves for regional failures. So if an entire region goes down, Route 53 will detect this, and it will start sending traffic to other parts of the world. And we'll cover that off in the Route 53 section of this course. Okay, so that's it, Cloud Gurus. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. By the way, if you want to go in and delete your auto-scaling groups, it's probably best. So you just click on auto-scaling group here, and just go to actions and hit delete, because you don't want to be running 3 instances at any given time. And by the way, when you do that, it will go in and delete all the EC2 instances automatically. It will start turning them off and just shutting them down. If I go ahead and hit refresh, you can see it's already shutting down one instance, and it'll shut this other one down shortly. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lab. Thank you.